Can you explain what a clinical hypnotherapist is? Because look, I guess the when anyone says hypnotherapy, the first thing I think of is me clucking on stage with like a stand-up comedic kind of thing. So I'm
Yeah,
sure even in
for
its
sure.
title, you receive some resistance in some way. So yeah, can you explain what it
Yes, for sure. And it's funny, I was thinking that this question definitely would come up in the respect of, what we perceive as hypnosis.
is?
And sure, don't get me wrong, there is stage hypnosis, and that's somebody else doing something else. It's not what I'm doing. The thing is, I guess one thing to dispel before I explain what a clinical hypnotherapist is that you'll never ever do anything outside of your moral compass. So if you are told to cluck like a chicken, it's simply because you want to cluck like a chicken, right? Nobody has like power over you or anything to do so. So
Cool.
yeah. But in terms of a clinical hypnotherapist, I work therapeutically with people. So I trained here in Christchurch as a within clinical hypnotherapy. But basically, what I'm doing is working with all sorts of different types of I'll work with anything from limiting beliefs. So perhaps if there's like repeating patterns that are unresourceful, and being able to kind of work out where those links come from, and then reframe them, give new perceptions, and then be able to move forward in a positive, more resourceful way. Along with, say, working predominantly, I work with stress and anxiety. So that is my big like kettle of
Must be
fish. And
hard to find clientele of people who are stressed or anxious.
that's the thing, it's so prevalent in today's society, so it's
Right.
it's so common. And that would be definitely my avenue or my niche of what I work in.
Mm.
But I was led here through my own journey, and I think that that was probably so life changing and so life affirming that I was like, oh wow, I need to do something within the space of the mind body connection, and actually support people to higher ground.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can dive into that as much or as little as you want to. I think it does help sometimes help people understand how you enter into this work because I do know, especially as Kiwis, when we are in that kind of healing space or helping others, it can feel a little imposter syndrome-y as well, especially if you've gone through your own stuff of like, oh, who am I to, help?
Mm.
How can I help? And so I love that you've taken your own journey and you are being so generous with it to others. Like that's so cool. And thank you for being a voice in this space. But yeah, to kind of touch on how you found your way into it through your own journey, did you go through this kind of therapy? Or did you?
In some respect, I did. There's a couple of different things. I think I was led here. I've been led here my entire life. In fact, this work feels so innate and part of me
Mm.
to like my absolute core that I feel like I've been doing it for lifetimes. Like it's so natural. So I was led here through the death of my father and the birth of my daughter, which crossed over really in quite a weird way in terms of the time and the date and everything. And that's what kind of turned my world upside down. So I started in the birth space. So I have like a niche within fertility, birth, and postpartum.
Mm.
And it was my birth that was just like the most empowering, life affirming moment of my life. But I guess on the flip side, I was absolutely rattled when I found out I was pregnant. I was terrified at the thought of birth or anything like that. So I jumped on, I sat down with a friend and she told me about this book, and it was called Hypnobirthing. And I thought it sounded quite, I was curious of the name,
Yeah.
put it that way. And then the next thing, I was signed into this course. I was 34 weeks pregnant, and I literally threw the kitchen sink at it. Like it became a philosophy, not just helpful for labor and birth, but it was like something I could draw from for like everyday living in the terms of stress and anxieties and things like that. So
And can I zoom
yeah,
in here just for people who may be unaware in my limited knowledge around
mm,
it? When you say hypnobirth, is it almost like a meditation, a mantra, a self
oh,
practice? Like, yeah, what are you
yeah, true.
thinking of?
Very,
Yeah.
yeah. good question. So hypnobirthing is basically, I mean, I teach it, and my approach is reframing the paradigm of coping with labor to welcome it from a position of resource. So this is where we're learning, and I guess that's where I kind of have to begin to weave in the autonomic nervous system and the understanding between our fight and flight response and our rest and digest. And often we're walking around like we've pressed a car alarm. So we're in that fight and flight response, and we've got everything to stimulate that response, from, you know, being overly contactable and replying to emails 24/7 to them being cut off in traffic. And so that system's being activated all the time. And that adrenaline and cortisol is really flooding our chemistry. So we're wanting to actually be able to retrain our body and our mind to be able to sit in that space of that healing space, that parasympathetic, that rest and digest. And that's really important, not just for birth or labor and birth, but for everyday living. So yeah, that would be, you know, a big part of it. But then there's visualization. It is kind of like a meditative state in the respect of, I suppose it's what I need to clarify around hypnosis, is that it is somewhat of a meditative state.
Beautiful.
But when I say a meditative state, anyone can do it. Like, you don't need to be some Zen master that's sitting on a mountain, you know, saying a mantra or chanting. It's literally just for anyone, and anyone can do it. So there's such power in it.
What is the difference then between hypnotherapy and meditation, like a guided meditation? Like, how do they then differ?
Yes.
We've spoken about how perhaps there's some crossover, and what I'm hearing you say, it's like almost like the situation is what it is, and through meditation or hypnobirthing or therapy in general, it's a way to kind of accept the situation but respond perhaps differently than our chemistry wants us to. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, so hypnosis it's a really relaxing state. We all access this state every single day. In fact, we wake up in it and we go to sleep in it, which is really, there's so much power in that. And that's because of brainwave levels, which I'll brief on in a moment. But we're bypassing the conscious critical thinking mind. And you can think of this like an iceberg. If you were to kind of imagine an iceberg and that little bit of ice on the top of the water, that's your conscious mind. And that runs about 10% of everything. So it's a very minute amount. It's critical thinking, it's decision making, it's analytical, it's logical, and it's willpower. But then something underneath, then you've got the subconscious mind, which is that big piece of ice that you can't see, which is underneath the surface.
Driving everything, yes.
Yeah. And sometimes that willpower can lose out to that power of that subconscious mind. So, you know, consciously in life, we want to feel footloose and fancy free, but there's something underneath the surface that's actually getting in the way. So our subconscious mind is responsible for, say, 95% of the show. It's running like pretty much everything. It's metaphorical, or it speaks in metaphors. It's imaginative, it's creative, it's intuition, it's our beliefs, all of our habits, it's any trauma, it's all of our emotions. And it's also not older than 7 years old. So it's actually childlike. So this is the power of hypnosis, where we create this childlike play when we're journeying through hypnosis as well. So it's kind of like, if you think of hypnosis as a submarine going underneath the water with a zoom lens camera, and we're really zooming in on any kind of limiting beliefs or perhaps things that have happened in your life, to then be able to create fresh perspectives, or to be able to actually release any kind of tension or anxieties around certain perhaps traumas or situations that have happened.
Can I give a real life example of me and how that might what we would kind of do? Is that okay? You comfortable?
Yeah, sure.
So I guess like I have some pretty limiting beliefs which have been aha moments for me of having these really big lofty dreams, and I think at its core not actually feeling deserving or worthy of them. I sit a lot in my masculine energy, which I'm sure you perhaps are familiar with, less in my feminine energy. So I'm strangling things. I don't truly believe that that all the good I'm putting out will come back for me. I have some like self-abandonment issues which make trusting that the good I'm doing will return. and probably
Mm,
from childhood trauma of abandonment or not feeling loved or whatever. I can't kind of seem to, I objectively and logically understand that barrier,
mm,
but have not
right.
yet been able to kind of reroute that thinking without my negative self-talk kind of eye roll, at the proposed different narrative that I am worthy of love, I am worthy of success, all of those sort of things. How would kind of working with you and doing this kind of therapy, what would that look like, if you don't mind me using your time
Yeah.
as selfishly
No.
as possible? I just think it's a lot of my listeners really relate to, a lot of my listeners are really go-getter driven people who kind of end
Mm,
up in a or perfectionism or people pleasers who
for
end up
sure.
kind of like feeling like we're trying to bust down a door that's shut from us, rather than perhaps looking at life more subjectively and looking at the doors that happen to be open. Just that kind of frustration, I feel like, is really prevalent in the group of people that listen to this podcast, which
Totally.
you can
Yeah.
help with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, those, perfectionism and things like that are really common, definitely. And I think they often kind of can stem from childhood as well. And I really relate to what you're saying, very
Yeah,
much
great,
so.
great. Well, not great. Sorry. I'm sorry for
Good,
you.
good, 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 good.
In the trenches together. Yeah.
Yeah, we're in the trenches together. So there would be a few different ways in terms of how I would approach it. And the first thing is that I would start to begin to perhaps look at internal dialogue. So there's different tools that I would use. There's a CBT tool, which stands for cognitive behavior therapy, which you may be very well versed in. Yeah. So sometimes that allows us to get a lot of information out to find what the activating event is. So if there's like a common theme, and then moving to what those emotions are that play out in those consequential behaviors. And then that turns into, say, those thought patterns and those beliefs, and really having a good understanding of that. And simply even asking the question, what is the opposite? Like, what is the opposite of the belief that you're telling yourself? Because sometimes we don't consider that. Sometimes we perhaps looping and say something like, I'm not worthy of this success or XYZ. But have we ever said to ourselves that we are? And although we may reject that belief because we don't believe it yet, perhaps, it's even planting that seed to then begin looking for it. So that can kind of be a little bit of a beginning. But then it's
My
also
chest,
about,
my chest just felt lighter at that possibility. I had a physical reaction to that thought of like, yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice.
yeah, yeah, right. So it's like, imagine what that would be like and what it would feel like, what you would see, what you would hear. And as soon as we start to actually tap into the feeling, the seeing, the hearing, we're utilizing that trance state, that hypnosis. And we probably start to notice a difference in our respiration, and maybe our breathing changes, right? Um, and there would also be perhaps, sometimes I'll approach things with, say, a regression session. So I do quite a bit of regression work where we're perhaps going back to the root cause of what happened. And then we're actually being able to, say, look at it from like a bird's eye view and pick up any learnings and lessons and how this can actually positively help us in our future. So we're still reframing the beliefs and putting new beliefs in and new suggestions, because that's very much what hypnosis is about, as well as like positive suggestion work when you're in a deeper relaxed state. Because when you're relaxed, you begin to actually take that in, because your subconscious is open and receptive to actually receiving that information. Whereas when we're in these states of kind of like alertness and running from one thing to another and really busy, we're rejecting it because it's our conscious mind that's like, nah, yeah.
And how long does that work kind of take? And have you experienced like great success in thriving individuals through your, I mean, I imagine you would have, or you probably wouldn't stick at it for so long. I'm sure that there's a
Yeah,
great ego bump for you too when you like are able to help someone work through that.
for sure. I mean, I guess my own story in the respect of I was able to reframe the way that I viewed birth and what I thought about it, and went from being terrified, like I mean petrified, to being so excited, so confident, and so empowered within 6 weeks. And this is somebody, or myself, who was a high functioning anxious person. So I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of kind of past trauma, all of that kind of thing. I really relate to what you're saying as well. So yeah, it can take anywhere. I mean, you could take between 3 to 12 sessions. This is just guesswork, but I've worked with people, say for IBS, for example, that's hugely linked to anxiety, and their IBS has just disappeared. Or, fertility clients, it's amazing. Like I'll work with somebody who is really struggling to get pregnant, and then bang, like within 6 weeks, they're pregnant. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to, yeah, I guess we can be, there's a quote about being like kind of our greatest, our mind can either be kind of that worst enemy or greatest ally. And it's beginning to actually become really aware of those internal thought patterns and asking ourselves whether it's true. Like, is this actually true for me? Or like, where have I learned this? Or being curious and observing, sitting in more of an observation space. I do a lot of kind of imagining you're in a play. So to do a lot of that when I was younger. And so you're imagining you're in a play as a character, and then you're watching yourself like play out that role. And is it resourceful for you, or is it kind of creating a hindrance? And if it's creating a hindrance, it's like, okay, cool, let's do something about this that's positive to put us in the right direction, or the direction we're calling forth to that higher ground.
When you say you sort of specialize in anxiety and stress related, is that just an observation of society currently, or is it that yeah, you've just found more of a kind of geeking out and finding that pathway? Or
Yeah,
is it
that's a great
people are coming to you
question.
with kind of adrenal fatigue? Because I know that, like myself, a lot of people who listen to this are prone to burnout, maybe high
Yeah.
functioning depressives like myself that need to keep busy because sitting in stillness, and even this idea, I feel like a sweaty palm coming on of this idea of getting to that relaxed state. I think in stillness, my depression has avoided a lot of stillness because of the things that would come up, and my fight or flight response paired with anxiety is kind of just avoided baths, avoided time alone, avoided that, which is ironically the medicine I need to kind of let it come and deal with it. But yeah, I think yeah, that adrenal fatigue and sort of burnout is really common. I notice in my own clients as
100%.
well. Yeah.
Definitely. And, I guess the reason I work in this environment, or the stress and anxiety environment predominantly, is because of my own health journey. I was in and out of hospital a lot as a, younger person, or in my early 20s, late teens. And yeah, I thought it was kind of the jobs and everything I was in, but it was more or less that I was under just this immense stress. And it's interesting because I had a lot of stomach issues and gut issues, like horrific, on the ground, kind of screaming and crying and hospitalized and whatnot. But what's really quite just an amazing kind of light bulb moment was, I worked in banking, and I went back to the bank probably about, it must have been over a year ago now. And I was with my daughter and I was with my husband, and we're having like a great time, like having a look around in the mall, whatnot. And then had to go and get a new card. And the next thing I was like, oh my God, my whole body started to just like go into this like shock almost. And it was like I was in horrific pain. And I said to my husband, we've got to go home. Like I've got to go home. And it was like in that moment to be like, wow, mind body connection, bang. My body didn't forget what that was like. So that's, I guess, why I do the work that I do, is because I believe wholeheartedly that, our emotional experiences and our stresses really do have that roll-on impact into those physical and conditions that we can have. So, when you say in terms of, feeling that kind of discomfort around relaxing, I 100% empathize and understand, because I remember like lying in Shavasana once, which is like a yoga pose where you just lie there. I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, I could be doing a million things with my time right now. I could be making dinner. I could be like going for a walk. Like, why am I lying here? And I guess the big thing to say is as it gets easier, is that discomfort, we can't grow in comfort, we grow in discomfort. So it's so powerful to just sit in that space and honor it and be like, okay, I feel uncomfortable right now. I know that I feel uncomfortable, but this is actually positive because I'm pushing through new kind of into, new places of learning and lessons. So, and sometimes the work that I do isn't always this long, relaxing process. I use neuro-linguistic programming, and that's really fast and really snappy. And it's quite amazing. Like, it can be.
Is that the tapping or no? Is it different?
No, I do that as well. Yeah.
Okay. What's
But,
neuro-linguistic?
So neuro-linguistic programming is that we're using, so neuro being the nervous system and being the brain, linguistic, we're using language, and then programming is all of our programs. So all of our conditioning from way, 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 way back. And whether those beliefs are actually serving us any longer, or whether they were ours to begin with. Sometimes the beliefs that we've taken on aren't even ours anyway, they're somebody else's, right? So it's about being able to utilize different processes to then upgrade. It's like upgrading software, really. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, this is so, I'm so jazzed. I really would love to work on this and do this with you. It's yeah, it's a cool way of thinking about it. I think the stress, and it's that ability to relax. I had a few things that I kind of wanted to speak to you about, and yeah, just a real fear of that. It's, it's affected my relationships that I've had. In terms of like romantic relationships, because I'm an active relaxer, and like I cause other people stress and anxiety, because when they're trying to relax, I've got like this like must do, must achieve. And I do feel immense guilt when I'm not putting on output. I put all my validation on achievement. So I find it really difficult to relax. I don't know if you have any like tips for anyone who's going through that they could apply sort of today if they're not in a position to do this work with you. Is there anything that you recommend doing to help people get more comfortable in that space of calmness?
Totally. I mean, the first thing is having that awareness of where we are. So I think one of the big things is accepting where we are as well, because that we can immediately drop that kind of feeling of guilt when we accept, like, okay, here is the deal. This is what I'm experiencing. This is the emotions that are coming up because, I'm wanting to achieve and I'm wanting to get things done. And often working with people, I would work with that rather than against it. Like, let's do something positive with it. In terms of what somebody can do right now, I guess, it is being able to actually like honor and accept it. It's probably tricky to give specific tips, but becoming really aware of your internal dialogue, becoming, there's 4 different levels of awareness, and it's kind of like learning to drive a car. So if we start to really become aware of those thought patterns of what we're saying to ourselves, it gives us also power to be able to start changing them and asking ourselves whether, like I said before, is that the truth of what I'm saying to myself, or would something else be more resourceful or more positive here? And then writing that down, beginning to actually write, like keep a journal of that type of information, so that you can have the ability to be able to switch those beliefs around or switch those thoughts around. Is that long-term impactful? I think often when we're working with the conscious mind, not necessarily. We have to be working with that subconscious mind. So often working with people, I would teach them self-hypnosis, which is a really kind of straightforward process. It's not, it can take 10 minutes. Any recordings that I do for people, I don't like to necessarily do these long recordings because a lot of people don't have the time. So what can we do in just a few minutes? And that's, 3 to 5 minutes. Even the heart-brain connection's pretty powerful, right? To shift our state, like to shift out of kind of those rush modes. Yeah, I mean, I could even take you through that. Really, at the moment, we could do that at the
Yeah.
moment.
Do you want to? Should we do it? Do you have
Okay, let's
that? Yeah, I'd love
do
to.
it.
Oh my God. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Everyone listening will be like, yes, make her do it. Yeah.
I could do it.
Keep in mind, if you are listening to this and you are driving,
Yeah, don't do anything when you're driving. I always put that at the start of my recordings now, like make sure that you're in a comfortable place.
yeah,
But what this is really lovely because literally it can just take 1 minute to be able to actually change our state.
Right.
In terms of perhaps, what you were talking about with high achieving and perfectionism.
Do
This
you
could
relate to that, or am I missing
yes.
the beat here? Okay.
Oh no, I relate.
Okay, I feel like we're vibing, but I just wanted to also you're also very empathetic, so I also don't want to pass judgment.
I think,
but yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, definitely. And I think awareness has been a massive key for me. And then being able to actually accept so then I don't feel guilty, and be able to actually honor and pull back. But it's a skill set. It's like you're learning to ride a bike again, but in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's hard because I have obviously ego. I mean, I'm an actor and I love performing.
Yeah.
And a lot of my identity is that I like being of service to others and I like being
Yeah.
all these things that my high achieving and overachieving allow of me. And so there's also a bit of resistance of like, why would I change that? Like I'm doing great. So it's the real paradigm
Yes.
at the expense though of making myself ill, gut issues, digestive issues,
Mm.
hives, like hair fall, like a lot of very physical symptoms because of being at that like heightened
Level.
state. And the heartbreak attached to like not wanting to change that because I know my drive is also like I am chasing dreams. So it just becomes this real like confusing soup of like how do I have maximum output in a way that is not so unhealthy and that I can accept as doing enough because I'm not where I want to be in my career. I have this huge guilt that any moment not spent driving towards it is a moment wasted, and therefore the depression brain comes in and it's like, well, if I don't get the job or the audition or the whatever, it's because of that time that I was lackadaisical. It's like this self really like toxic soup really is the best way to
So
describe it. And it's a little,
I like that metaphor.
yeah, it's a little much.
Do you ever take moments out where you reflect on all of your wins and all of your success to where you are now? Do you ever have kind of that look and that rear vision and think, wow, like that's amazing. I've, done all these incredible things throughout my life.
I have beautiful, amazing, delightful friends around me who will remind me of that, but I don't genuinely feel that connection to that being good or done, like tick the box. Does that like I don't feel I mean, subjectively, I can zoom out and go like, oh yeah, if you had asked me at 15 that I would be in LA, then yes, I can understand and go like, oh, that would be cool. But more consuming than that is that I haven't yet got to a place. And I do know that that benchmark keeps changing. So
Right.
I'm never gonna feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that could be, like I say, that subconscious program that's running. And so it's about going in with that submarine that goes under the water to look at what that program is, what's kind of fueling it, and to give it fresh perspective. Sometimes that takes inner child work as well, that we kind of bring in like, adult Kim to talk to little Kim and be able to
I don't know if she'd be the great voice.
No, but it's a powerful work. Like it's, being able to give that kind of loving compassion and that kind of fresh perspective to certain circumstances that perhaps have played out. I guess I really relate to what you're saying in terms of that high achiever and wanting to, more. but often we find that it's a subconscious program that's running, and it's about being able to give that fresh perspective. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like the program is if you achieve everything, do everything, be everything, you will be good enough not to leave, is really, I think, what the sentence is,
Right.
which is from a abandonment trauma. Um, yeah, it's just,
And that's a super common one that I'd work with, like in terms of
yeah.
abandonment wounds. They're so prevalent, so prevalent. And, I mean, it's even in terms of when we were born, like, I was 89, you're 90, but it's like you were kind of, not, you might have been put in another room, like
Mhm.
when you were first born. So there's all of these like tiny little abandonment wounds anyway, rather than even just somebody walking out, like a parent walking out or something, that's more traumatic or significant.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's
and
so
I
common.
also can like one of my trauma wounds is that like I used to always fall asleep in the car and I would wake up and the car's in the garage, everyone's in, like they've left the door open. Like it isn't that I've been abandoned, it's that, but the waking up, not having anyone around, like because my dad
Yes.
used to leave me sleeping in the car because I wouldn't sleep well at nighttime. And so it was like
Yeah.
from an adult POV, like I was
Yes.
perfectly safe. They were checking on me, but my memories are that I've waking up, no one's around, you're alone, crying, like, and it being a trauma
Yes.
of like this left behind thing. It's just
Yes.
so as an adult, I know that wasn't the narrative, but I at the time I didn't like.
Totally. And the thing is with the subconscious, if there's a gap, we'll fill it with information.
Mhm.
So whether it's the truth or not the truth, we'll fill it with whatever we think's truth. So it's like, oh my gosh, I was left in this car, like, no one loves me, or, everyone's like leaving me out, or whatever it might be.
Forgotten
And
about, yeah, and that's
forgotten
like
about me.
one of many
And then
narratives.
we take that through our entire life. And often I find it's in our late 20s when it really starts to rev up, and that's when it comes to the surface. So it's about being able to go back into that memory. So with hypnosis, we go back into a memory to then be able to actually heal the memory. So be able to actually give it some compassion, some love, take learnings out of it. And you can even think that a learning and something that's amazing is that, well, it has allowed you to be this amazing, driven, successful, incredible young woman, right? Obviously not, you don't want that to your detriment, but there's all these amazing things at the same time. So we just want to be able to do it from a place that's actually feels good rather than a place of resistance.
Yeah,
And I would say to people that resistance is a call to action.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, take me through this.
Okay, so this is
I'll talk at you forever. So otherwise, yes, go.
Okay, so this is just for us to basically be able to kind of consider an event that you've got at the moment that maybe's caused a stressor or something like that. I'm sure that there's something, given the fact that we've been chatting, there'll be something there right now.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. And we're just going to, I'll just take you through this exercise. It will take us like 1 to 3 minutes. So the first thing I'll get you to do is I'm going to get you just to close your eyes down. And all the listeners back at home can also do this as well.
Unless they're driving.
Yeah, unless you're driving. Don't do this if you're driving. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so just closing the eyes down. And I want you just to start to become aware of this, say, stressful feeling in your body, or maybe your mind's racing. So just becoming aware of it, observing it, and being curious to it. There's no need to judge it. And I want you just to begin by just actually putting your hand over your heart. And as you put your hand over your heart, I want you just to focus into this area. And just focusing in on the heart. And I want you to take at least 3 slow breaths in and out of your nose. And as you do this, I want you to breathe in and out of the heart space and just maintaining your focus on the feeling of your hand in the center of your chest. That's it. And just continue doing that. And now what I want you to do is I want you to recall a time when you felt really, really good. A time you felt love or joy, and I can see that's already happening, maybe even hilarious, just real happiness or joy. And I want you to return to that memory. And as you return to that memory, I want you to see what you saw. I want you to hear what you heard. And I want you to feel how good that felt. That's it. Good. And as you feel this feeling in your body, I want you just to imagine, because I know that you've got a wonderful imagination. I want you to imagine your heart speaking to you. And I want you to ask your heart, how could you take better care of yourself in this moment or in this situation? And then just listen to what your heart says. And once you've just got some message from your heart, some insight or clarity, you can just open your eyes and come back to the space.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's just, we're not obviously dropping into this, going really deep, but believe it or not, you're in a trance in that moment. And because you do acting as well, the trance is just, it's easy to access because you're having to step into other characters all the time. So you've got to imagine yourself as something else.
My favorite
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. That's so good. Yeah, it is interesting. It's and I'll ask it to you, but I often ask people on this podcast what their brain looks like, and my version is this kind of frizzy-haired woman staring to camera, surrounded by bulging filing cabinets. So not even in 2023, obviously. And they're bulging, and it's like you've asked her to get something and she knows she's got it, but just the stress of finding it. And I think it's sort of almost this metaphor of like, I know that I'm smart and I possess everything to, and within me and the lessons to like pursue this life with great ease, but I'm just so flustered all the time that I have all this doubt that I even do know, or yeah, it's just this judgment, or I can't find it. But it's interesting doing that exercise because obviously I was asking something specific, but I do know really the answer to everything. I've just got all these layers over top of it that are
Yeah, that can kind of
looking
create a bit of fog, right? And an
at.
important or another thing, going back to your question earlier, is mental rehearsal and visualization can be powerful ways to be able to actually change our way we're moving forward. So if we have a situation that plays out, say you have had that kind of perfectionist thing that's come up, or you've responded in a way that you're like, oh, I wish that, I didn't have to react that way in terms of, perfectionism or whatever it would be. And then be able to take a moment out to close your eyes down, connect into that, and just, honor it and know that that was what happened, but then change what happened. So change in your mind's eye what happened, mentally rehearse it differently, mentally rehearse it the way you would like it to go the next time. So it's kind of like, even, some people struggle with receiving compliments, and, compliments are like a gift, right? So instead of, being like, oh, no, like, oh, do I really look that good? Oh, no. It's like being able to actually kind of close our eyes and then imagine ourselves receiving that and doing it differently, mentally rehearsing it differently and visualizing it in a more powerful and positive way to bring about change.
Mm.
Yeah. And doing that in the morning when you wake up, first thing in the morning, and when you go to bed at night, because you're in a state of theta, which is the brainwave state that is hypnosis. It's imagery, it's intuitive, it's very relaxing. And so it's the best time to start implementing positive change.
Can I question that? Just because I find mornings are great, nighttime, not a good time mentally for Miss Crossman. Like I actually
Okay.
find that, yeah, morning I would be like so hopeful. Evenings are not great. Is there any science in that maybe that you're aware of? Like I don't almost trust myself in the evening in terms of like I wouldn't trust myself to respond to a message or conflict, or like I do feel that I'm at a stage of fatigue, or yeah, that negative self-talk is much more prevalent in the evening. Is there something I could do to counteract that, or have you encountered that
So
before? Am I
when
unique?
you, we're all unique, but when you
And
go to
not
bed at
unique at
night,
the same time, yeah.
when you go to bed at night, Is your mind racing?
Very much so. I now medicate with melatonin just to kind of
Mm.
like, which is a natural thing, but
Yeah.
I usually will exhaust myself to the during the day to kind of be able to go straight to sleep. But then I wake
Mm.
up a lot in the evenings, and yeah, just with thoughts, with everything. I do feel very hopeful in the morning. I feel like, yeah, I kind of like peak early
Mm.
and then really kind of then it's almost a post afternoon, sun goes down, Kim goes down sort of thing. Like, yeah.
Um, what can happen? And I mean, this is generalized. I'm not saying
Yep.
that this is for everyone, but what can happen is that when we wake up in the morning, and like I say, it can be a great time to do that mental rehearsal, but then sometimes it's like we begin looking for that anxiousness or looking for that way that we were the day before because we've become accustomed to the familiar, and humans don't really like change in terms of our state of being. It becomes, we like the familiar, we crave that familiar comfort, even though consciously we know it's not serving us, but we keep looking for it. So it's like we wake up and then suddenly it's like, oh, there's that anxiety. Awesome. There you are. Great. Got your back. And you're going to help drive my day because you've been purposeful in some way. So, it's a strategy. It's like it's worked as a positive, but then obviously it's creating that fatigue and that roll-on effect for later. So then later you're feeling, exhausted when that self-negative talk comes up. And the thing is that our thoughts, in terms of the chemistry, it gets stronger and stronger. So we have anywhere between 6,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day. I know that's really vast, but the research suggests like anywhere between that bracket. But 80% of them are repeating thoughts from the day before and the day before and the day before. So they become like our way of being. And so it's almost like we get stuck in that cycle where that's familiar, comfortable, even though it's not serving us. So that's where really using things like hypnosis or the work that I do helps to shift people out of those states. And I mean, I've worked with people that have been highly anxious, as in shaking in a corner, kind of like distressed as anything, and they've been able to shift themselves within 3 sessions.
Wow.
And it's amazing to, watch that. So I think like in terms of something purposeful for you is to be doing that mental rehearsal in the morning when you're feeling that high hope, like work with that. That's amazing. Work with it to be able to, see yourself kind of perhaps the situation from the day before that didn't go the way that, that was that old pattern coming up. See yourself, feel yourself and hear yourself doing it differently, because then your brain will start looking for that. It starts to become possible. It takes work and it takes focus, much like learning to drive a manual vehicle, for instance. You've got to really focus on the gear change and everything. But eventually it's outsourced to the subconscious and you're flicking through the gears, you've got the music cranked up, the window down, your mate yarning, and you're feeling, footloose and fancy free, hopefully.
It's not how I drive a manual car, but yes, I'm not there yet with manual, but that's because we didn't have one. But yes, I even just driving in general, yeah, it went from
Yeah.
being all consuming to so sorry, 2 questions and then I'll live and leave you. I want to talk about addiction because I wondered if this is
Sure.
something someone I know had gone through a form of therapy around quitting smoking, and I wondered if you had any experience for people with addiction, whether it be alcoholism more so, or low tier perhaps in that realm as like a sugar addiction and stuff. Is that something that you also have found success with hypnotic therapy?
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. So smoking's probably what hypnotherapy is kind of known for. It's a lot of people, that's their initial thing to be like, oh, I went to a hypnotherapist for smoking and it was amazing. So it can work really effectively for smoking, provided you want to give up. Yep. And then I've started to actually work with quite a number of people in terms of alcohol. I wouldn't say necessarily addiction. It's more just the fact I've become aware of like, more aware of what alcohol does to our bodies, and then they're wanting to perhaps take a different route. So I actually did a course. It was like a 4-week course and it was called Off the Piss.
Love it. Perfect. Great branding.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it was to start examining like our behaviors around it. I actually explored my own behaviors last year because I took like 5.5 months away from alcohol just to kind of be curious and approach it in a way of being like, oh, this is interesting. I always feel at home when I walk into like our local pub, but I grew up in a pub. So, um, you know, there's always kind of reasons to why we might do the behaviors we do. And people aren't their behaviors, right? They really aren't. It's a set of programs that perhaps are sending them in that unresourceful spiral. So yeah, it's definitely something I work with.
Interesting. And then I guess what does your brain look like? I kind of gave you a little bit of insight to mine. You can
Oh,
take
cool.
that however you want to explain. But yeah, what does it look like up there?
I guess the big thing is that, I'm human like anyone else, and I wear my heart on my sleeve in the respect of being really open and honest. And, I've done so much positive work on myself, and I see myself to be kind of somewhat, I guess, reinvented, which
Mm.
is really great. And I'm way more aware of my thought cycles and things, but I do get pulled back into perhaps especially that high achievement and that perfectionism that runs into burnout. So I am really just mindful of my body and how my body's responding. If I start to get that hypervigilance and that kind of like shallow breathing, I know something needs to change, and I know I need to voice it and say, I need to rest right now, and know that rest is productive. So sometimes on days it can be a little bit scrambly, but provided I'm utilizing, preaching what I practice, using the tools that I teach,
Mhm.
I'm usually pretty grounded. But definitely went through a bit of that spiral recently, which I really relate to what you're saying. And actually, I've just let myself switch off for the whole weekend, which was lovely. And doing something that we find joy in. I did a heap of cooking in the weekend. So, finding something that brings us joy in those moments where perhaps we are presented with those repeating patterns.
Mm, beautiful.
Mm.
And where can people find you and how can they work with you? Do you offer working remotely as well? I know you're Christchurch based. Yeah, how can people find you?
So Instagram's probably the best place, which is BE underscore hypnotherapy. And then my website, www.behypnotherapy.co.nz. And yeah, I work with people remotely. So I have a few clients that I work with in Australia. Had people contact me from the States as well, more so around fertility.
Yeah,
But yeah, I work remotely online as well as in person. Yeah,
beautiful.
so it's just as effective either way.
On that, because I just did have, sorry, we'll let you go in a second. The question around fertility, is it that people are actually, is it possible, this may be so ignorant as someone who's not done this journey, is it possible and scientific that you can actually be presenting and blocking yourself based on sort of different thought patterns and that is that kind of what the idea would be that with some
Yes, it can be for sure. I mean, I'll work in conjunction with other care providers, and I think that
sure.
our health holistically has to be that multifaceted
Yep.
approach with you might have your doctor, and you might have your hypnotherapist, your naturopath or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
Um, but with fertility, I'll do it over a 6-week period. And yeah, we do really dive into limiting belief patterns, what we're internally saying to ourselves, but also reframing a lot of the medical use of words. Like there's some words that perhaps don't support us. The first word is infertility, as that often we hear that rather than fertility. And sure, there are many people that perhaps are in that boat of experiencing just, that is more about they might come to me for resolve. So just resolving the fact that they perhaps can't conceive.
Yes.
But for a lot of people, they're actually just on a fertility journey. So let's start to flip that language. So we start to actually respond to it in our bodies with from a more positive point of view. I mean, even the word pain, we're hyper vigilant to that word pain, that we actually release cortisol and adrenaline into our bloodstream. So we've got to be so mindful of the language and the words we're using. They're like spells, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's a it's kind of based on connecting, reframing, clarifying, engaging, enhancing, and resolving.
Mm.
So yeah, it's over 6 weeks, but it's intensive, but it's amazing and beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, cool. Oh, well, I'm sorry, I've taken so much of your time, but I love you. You're adorable. Thank you so much for such a great chat today. And yeah, I'd love to have you on again and maybe like check in sort of 6 months or something like that. Or
Amazing.
obviously, I'll message you to the side because it'd be really cool to work together. I'd be really curious about doing some of this work with you too. But thank you
Cool.
for your time and thank you for the work you're doing. It's been a real joy.
Oh, thank you so much, Kim. I'm honestly so grateful to, yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.